Hey kids, and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It is August 19th. We're going to talk about the 19th to the 25th. But first, we're going to talk for a minute about last week. I don't know what it was like for you, Zoe, but my life was a shit show.
Yeah.
With that Mercury retrograde experience.
I've had some issues.
Yeah. I mean, the technical problems were epic. I have Sun and Venus at the 28 and 29 degrees of Leo. So this Mercury retrograde is very much about my identity. So I'm having crises with in some friendships and others, because my identity's been triggered by Mercury. And then technologically, damn, it's just been insane. And for all, so that you all know, listening audience, we had a lot of retrograde challenges when we went to record today. So we got another week or so of the backward movement. He does not turn around and go direct this week. Sorry to say. So we've got a little more, although there are some Mercury retrograde transits this week that we will have to talk about. But first, let's do a question. Jennifer writes, "Hello, Michael. Sending so much appreciation to you for all the depth, groundedness, passion, and exuberance you bring to everything you offer. Listening to you is always a joy and source of ever-deepening understanding." Thank you, Cynthia. Can you please explain specifically what the meaning of the Seska square is? And how does it differ from what we would think of as a regular square? Thank you very much. From much love from a devoted Cytherean, which is, I think, a ancient civilization or starseed. It's a little out of my wheelhouse, but I looked it up briefly. Jennifer. So, yes, I love little instructive tidbit questions like this. Happy to answer it. So the square is a 90-degree angle. I like to make the sort of, little story of how to understand a square best is to look at the floor and the wall. They are squaring each other. They're in a 90-degree angle. And they're each holding their position unabashedly. The floor says, lie down, and the wall says, you're doing it wrong, stand up, and that's a crisis and a conflict. But if you allow for the crisis and conflict to be there and to move through it, to learn from it, the building stands up, right? So I had an astrology teacher, Stephanie Azaria, who used to call squares stepping stones. That the idea is a square in astrology might mean you want to get something done, you want to get across the river, but there are stepping stones to get you there, but they're unevenly spaced. Some of them are mossy and slippery, and it's going to be a dicey experience getting where you want to go. And that's the nature of the square. You're going to get where you want to go, but not without resolving the conflict. So then the other relative square kind of a transit that we have would be a semi-square, a 45-degree angle, which is the same interpretation of the 90-degree angle square, but like half that. So a mild conflict and obstacle. So both of those square-type geometries are capable of generating change. Things can happen as a result of moving through a square or a semi-square. The only distinction between those two is the volume of the intensity of the experience. A square can break something down, or a square can build something up, depending on your narrative and what is doing the squaring. The Seska square is a 135-degree angle. It's a very weak geometry shape. You wouldn't see it in buildings. It can't form structure. It doesn't have enough to break anything. It doesn't make anything. It's just the angle of friction. Two bodies relating to each other in this angle are just shooting each other edginess. So I use in my Daily Astro Alert subscription series, I would use words like frustration, bother, friction. And I always point out it's a weak angle. It can't make nothing. It can't break nothing. So when the Sesca square is present, whether it's hitting your chart or passing in transit and as part of the general energy, whatever consciousness is held by the planets that are engaged with each other, you want to think of each planet's consciousness, what they bring. Mars is action, Uranus is sudden change. And the Sesca square would have action and change relating to each other, where movement and choices would be fueled by frustration, bother, and friction, but not in a way that could be destructive or productive, just an awareness that there's something not quite right. We are in talk about squares. we are in a full moon in Aquarius that hits Monday, the 19th today. So if you heard this when it came out on Sunday night, it's today, it's Monday, August 19th, peaking at like 11:28 a.m. Sun is in Leo, moon is in Aquarius, so we have our Aquarius full moon. There is so much going on in this full moon, I almost don't know where to start. So I'm going to start with the basics. Sun's in Leo, so that means we're focused on our gifts and talents, centering ourselves and putting us in the bright, shiny place where we are willing to share our gifts and talents with the world. And remember, this doesn't have to be like, people don't have to clap. I mean, when I put my stuff out in the world, it's like, this sometimes happens, right? And it drives me. But like, everybody has a Leonian consciousness of centering themselves and finding their creative gifts. It doesn't have to be, like I say, Leo's about shining brightly, and your version of that doesn't have to be public or visible, but it's still about your creative abilities, what brings you joy, and lighting yourself up by centering yourself. It's the one mansion of the sun where it's okay to be self-centered, because we, ruled by the sun in Leo, we center ourselves when the sun is moving through this mansion. So Aquarius is where we serve the community. There is no Leo ego, I'm shining bright in the center in Aquarius. It's a circle where everyone's holding hands, and we've created a community where all people are served. So if all people are going to be served and served well, then that means that all individuals on the planet have to be bringing their A game and their best and their most creative and their most self-centered consciousness, and then make sure they're serving the world with their gifts and talents, whatever that looks like. So in an Aquarius full moon, we were going to want to celebrate in gratitude all of the ways that we understand this, all of the ways that we do serve the community, and that we understand the intuition that Aquarius brings will tell us exactly how to do that serving. But we have to have a balance between serving self and therefore serving others as a combination. Like back to me. I'm in Leo, Sun, and Venus. I like being, admired and adored and applauded. And I've created a life where that happens a lot. But like, I'm in good relationship with that now in my life because everything I do is in service. And so when people give me accolades back, they land in a place of humility because I'm exchanging for it. And it works in a graceful kind of way. And when I was a younger man, that was not the case. That took a couple of decades of self-investigation and healing. But this is what the essence of the full moon is. Now, Mercury in his retrograde cycle is conjunct the sun in this full moon. That's a few degrees off because last week is when they came together by in the inferior conjunction. But Mercury is slowing down so much. He's almost at the end of his process. And so he's like a third of a degree conjunct the sun. So what this means is any consciousness that's up for review or release or processes of endings that full moons can bring, or just anything that's coming up in a full moony kind of way, is likely to be carrying with it information that connected to Mercury being retrograde because he's, there. So you want to pay attention to what's been happening in your mind, in your thoughts, in your perceptions, and in your negotiations and communication with others over the last month or so, because material that you learned or have figured out or are in the process of working with are part of this full moon. Now, the epic T-square that's sort of on the side of this full moon, bringing all sorts of conflict and obstacles and changes and stepping stones for all of us peaking in this full moon, starts with the conjunction between Mars and Jupiter. That was also exact last week, but they're still close enough to be conjunct. They're only 2 degrees apart. Mars is at 19, Jupiter's at 17, Gemini. That's a stunning, beautiful energy of movement and expansion where action and goals and work and sex and your body is very much in alignment with everything that's possible. Jupiter brings that, Mars brings the choices and the action and the body, and that's a stunning energy in the sign of Gemini to help us, propel forward. However, there's a square from Mars and Jupiter to both Venus on one side and a square from Mars and Jupiter to Saturn on the other side. So ipso facto, that also means that Venus is opposing Saturn in this full moon. So let's start with that. Venus in Virgo, she's in her fall in this sign, not so happy. So her emotional body is a little triggerable with Venus in Virgo, but I like to remind you that Virgo is also ruled by Chiron, so we are in a healing modality with Venus in this sign. And since she's pulling into, actually, she pulled into this opposition yesterday and still plenty activated in this full moon in Virgo opposite Saturn in Pisces means that the unconscious is the source of the lessons around love and friendship and giving and receiving of love and finances, because Venus rules finances. And I say that because Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is the teacher who demands that we learn. Pisces is the sign he's in, and that invented the unconscious. And we have to respect that sometimes we're moving through territory where the lessons we have to learn aren't really obvious till we trip on them unconsciously and then get to turn around and say, oh, that's what I was feeling, or that's the conflict that was driving that behavior. So there's, in an opposition, something's got to happen, right? Two energies opposing have to swerve or fight or dance or fuck or leave or something. So Venus in the heart with Saturn the teacher means there's an undeniable lesson around love, friendship, intimacy, money. And both of them are squaring Mars and Jupiter. So if Mars and Jupiter are telling us everything and anything is possible, Saturn and Venus are telling the story of only if you open your heart to being worthy of receiving all that Mars and Jupiter is telling you want to create. Now, this is familiar language to you if you've been listening to me for a while. I say those sentences over and over and over and over again, because as a psychologist, this is what I've seen over and over again. I've seen it with thousands of people, and I know it exists in millions of people. Is that people want what they want, but inside their unconscious, they don't feel deserving of it, and that's why they can't create it or keep it when it arrives. So I'm always talking about the lesson of worthiness when Venus is involved, because even if you're not identifying with what I'm saying just now about worthiness, if you don't feel like you're feeling not worthy, trust me, in your unconscious, there's feelings of unworthiness because that's part of the human condition. And if you work on feeling worthy and deserving just as an abstract concept, everything will flow better because worthiness opens us up to possibility. Mars and Jupiter carry that possibility. Saturn and Venus say there might be some stepping stones or conflicts to work through in order to get where this full moon is telling us we can go. Thankfully, the Sun and Mercury are trining Chiron during this full moon. And why I say thankfully is because when the heart doesn't feel deserving, it's a wound. Chiron has been carrying us through tremendous wound healing experiences always, but certainly recently. And because the sun and Mercury are trining Chiron and the moon is sextiling Chiron, he's fitting really easily into this opposition that the sun and the moon are generating. Oppositions are hard. In a full moon, it's conscious awareness versus the unconscious in a really tight opposition that we experience regularly, but it's still a difficult moment in every lunar cycle. When a planet comes by, a third planet splits that opposition into an easy trine and an easy sextile. That's called an easy opposition. So Chiron is saying, I'm going to make this full moon like easy on you in terms of it's not a moment where you're going to be deeply wounded anew. But Saturn and Venus are saying there's work to be done that might connect to wounds. So I guess the point I'm making is it could be a lot worse if Chiron were, squaring the new moon instead of, making it an easy opposition.
That's like one positive thing I've heard this month.
Yeah, so it's a rough month. So I think the last thing I'm going to say about the full moon, and I'm going to talk about Saturn and Jupiter squaring, which is part of the full moon, but I'm going to talk about it in a separate segment here on the podcast because it deserves its own, it deserves its own segment. Neptune hovering at the 30th and anaretic mastery degree of Pisces all year long is intense. It's a beautiful placement because Neptune connects us to spirit and to the invisible, and to inspiration and direct power from our spiritual practice. But Neptune also has the shadow of I can't see something clearly, or I don't know what's going on, or I'm being deceived, or I'm deceiving myself, or, any of the ways in which we sort of can't operate in a clear and grounded way because we don't know, or we feel confused, or we're ignoring the messages from spirit, or we're, too much in the woo-wee-woo that we can't be on the ground somehow. And so the moon is semi-sextiling Neptune. That's an intimate relationship that they're just far enough apart that Neptune can participate in the full moon by virtue of this angle with the sun I'm about to describe without interfering. Any closer and the moon would be too close to be, I don't really know how to say this. It's like the semi-sextiles, two planets being 30 degrees apart, any closer and they can't operate fully. Like being in a hug you don't want to be in anymore, and you have to separate from the hug to feel like your independent body again. So the moon and Neptune are doing this, so Neptune is free to interact with the sun and Mercury in the inconjunct, the great eliminator angle, that says we can change the track we're on by letting the full moon take away or release or kill off or have some other way of transforming something that's interfering with our ability to know our gifts and talents and share them with the world. The challenge with this, it will come in whispers, not in bold statements and announcements. Like this is not going to come as an alert on your phone.
Right.
But this setup is perfect for the prayer that I frequently share at the full moon when there's a setup like this, where this prayer will be more effective than I think anything else you might say that's specific. Where you say, I am now ready to release anything and everything, known and unknown, conscious and unconscious, that inhibits my ability to know my gifts and talents and serve them effortlessly and powerfully with the world who's ready to receive them. And so it is. Have at it. There's your full moon prayer. Now, also inside this full moon is a square between Saturn and Jupiter. I'm pulling it out of that segment because I want to talk about it by itself because it's going to repeat again in December, which means it's influencing the whole second half of 2024 and a little bit even into 2025. So this is one of those pace-setting transits where we want what we want and we want it delivered and we want to move fast at the pace that we desire, and life on life's terms says, yeah, maybe not. There might be a bump in the road or a conflict you have to solve or a problem that you need to, get through, or something you need to learn in order to have what you desire. Jupiter and Saturn are what's called the social planets, which means their movements reflect boots on the ground experience we're having of life on life's terms. When it's the outer planets, like in conjunct between the full moon and the sun and Neptune, Neptune's part of our higher consciousness, right? So I talk about what's possible there, but the energy of Neptune means the higher self is whispering spiritual messages in your ear. When we're talking about Jupiter and Saturn, we're describing things that happen outside your front door in your life. Saturn represents everything you're trying to build, and Jupiter's representing everything that feels expansive and yummy and why you might be building something. Saturn is the structure, Jupiter is the dance on top of the structure. So when they are squaring each other, by the way, I did not plan the question from Cynthia. But it seems like a good day to have answered a question about squares because they're all over the full moon, and this one's important. Yeah, no, it's fabulous. I love it. And I really didn't plan it, so I love that even more. All this means is, in the realm of things you're trying to accomplish that require work and things you desire that lift your life up and make it feel yummy are more conflictual the second half of this year than flowing. And because this repeats in December because of retrograde motion, it does mean the pace of the rest of this year will potentially be slower and bumpier. And this few days, this full moon, and really this, mid to late August period of time will give you the sense of what I mean. Look at your life, see what's feeling flowing and what's feeling bumpy, and understand that that's the timbre of the next bunch of months, especially December and into next year.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Listen, it's not the best news in the world, but it's not quite as intense as 2025 and 2026 is going to be. We're sort of being prepped for even more difficult energy. So you will always find the hope here and the speak of resilience on this podcast, but make no mistake about it, we are in rough times energetically. And this is certainly one that's going to make a lot of people a little frustrated on a personal level vis-a-vis what you're trying to build and create and the joy that you want to have from your creations. Things are just going to maybe take more time than you desire or wish. And the last sort of thing I'll say about this that's more hopeful is you can't build something without squares. Bricks are square shaped. So squares are like having bricks thrown at you, right? If you keep throwing bricks at me and I have to catch them, I'm eventually going to get really good at catching them. But it might hurt. I might jam a finger or two or, get, abraded. So it's not like we can't work with this energy well because we're used to it. It's just part of life on life's terms, but it's a life on life's terms couple of months. There are some Mercury retrograde challenges this week. I have trouble imagining that they'll be more challenging than last week, but you never know, especially because one of them hit yesterday, which I probably talked about in last week's episode, though I can't remember anything. Mercury squaring Uranus is highly unstable. This is the triple transit that was exact yesterday. Back on July 21st was the first hit of this, so that might lead you to some clarity about breakdowns or sudden unexpected conversations or thoughts that are intrusive or bothersome or challenging. Like, this is not a comfortable transit. It's very tense in the sort of communicative and neck up experiences as a transit. So that's part of this week, because even though it happened exactly on Saturday, it's part and parcel connected to the full moon. And I don't even think And I don't even think we talked about that when I was at the full moon segment, but it's just another square that's part of the full moon experience. Is that your ideas may be tested and challenged. There might be radical new solutions could pop out of nowhere. And I would say this is a transit of like Mercury retrogradiness, meaning breakdowns of technology, things that trip you up that aren't emotional or personal or, communicative, but like things breaking down and bumping up. On August 23rd, two lovely things happen. One is I turned 61 years old. It's my birthday. So it's my birthday week coming up. On August 23rd, Mercury will trine Chiron. That's mind in a process in the unconscious. He's below because he's retrograde, connecting with the healing force that Chiron brings. Chiron helps us heal wounds, but he also inspires us to sort of use the mystery in ever better and better sort of ways and skills and talents to, understand alchemy and the mystery and magic with a K and all of the, ways that Chiron, like Yoda, teaches us how to use the force. And that's been part of this Mercury retrograde as well. And that peaks on the 23rd, which I think is Thursday. It harkens back to July 18th and will wrap up on September 2nd. So glance back, and if there's anything awareness related or healing related or using your mind or voice to have a healing experience, that might be part of what this transit ushers in. And the final one is Sunday. A sesqui square from Mercury to the North Node is, I don't know that this is going to yield a sesqui square. We talked about that in the question. I love this. The sesqui square is not a significant angle. It just means friction is present. So while this transit that hits on Sunday, the 25th, that hit on July 19th and will wrap up again on August 31st, isn't one of the triple transits where your process is involved. This is the energy that has also added to the friction and the bother and the frustration that this Mercury retrograde cycle has brought us, because that's the nature of this angle. It just feels shitty when we're in a sesqui square and ain't like nothing you can do about it in a way, because it's not an energy you can respond to. Because it's the North Node, it might harken to, obligations that you have to meet, gathering with other people that, in a way that's inconvenient. And so that might make for a weekend where you're having to, connect with others out of, obligation or inconvenience. July 19th was the first day it hit, and August 31st is the wrap-up, although I think I already said that. And that's the end of the Mercury triple transits. And Mercury will turn around next week, and we will unpack all of that in next week's podcast. On Thursday, the 22nd, at 7 a.m. or so Pacific time, the sun will leave Leo and enter Virgo. And we move into the mansion of process and integration, healing, putting things together, getting organized, getting all our ducks in a row. Virgo is ruled by both Mercury and Chiron. I like to always point that out because the precision and the detail sensibility of Virgo is expressed through Mercury's rulership. But Chiron, when he was discovered, was assigned to Virgo as a co-ruler. Now, this makes complete sense because Chiron was a healer, and that body, when it was discovered, was named for that mythological creature, the centaur that Chiron is. And in fact, this was technical in the world of astronomy because there's a astronomical body that's known as a centaur, which in mythology is half horse, half man. But in astronomy, a centaur is a body that crosses between the orbital paths of other planets. And that's what centaurs do in mythology. They cross the woods and they help us through. They bring wisdom. Some of them were mischievous as fuck. But Chiron was the cream de la cream of the wisdom teachers. And he knew the healing arts and herbs and but combat and, the mystery and the force. And so we know Chiron in astrology as our access to healing trauma, healing the body, and understanding how to work with life as a mystery as opposed to life as a practical thing that we can, see and get, which I think is an interesting, beautiful contradiction within Virgo. The precision piece of Virgo says we see life as it is and we work with it as it is in terms of the details. But the Chiron rulership says if we process and integrate and learn how everything works in a system, we can understand the mystery better. It's like if I learn all the details of astrology, Mercury, I can provide an experience of healing through the interpreting of the data, Chiron. So the next 4 weeks, starting on the 22nd, is all about that. Getting things organized, moving into healing a little bit more, and a 4-week opportunity to prepare for whatever is coming next. So get your journals out, write lots of stuff about your healing process, clean up your calendar, make sure you're not overdoing things, focus on things that require a mindset of details, organization, and moving parts, and you'll move through the mansion, taking advantage of exactly what it has to offer. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. Today we have a call-in dreamer. Rex is actually calling from a neighborhood away in Los Angeles. Hey
Oh,
Rex, what you
cool.
dreaming?
Yeah, hey Zoe, hey Dr. Michael.
Hey.
So I've actually been having recurring increasing nightmares over the past 9 months or so. All of them are actually different from one another, but the thing that's recurring is how they end, because they all end in the same way, with me being paralyzed and having to scream myself awake from them. And so just to tell you about the very first one I remember having was last October. And I was camping in a yurt, and I, in the middle of the night, had this dream that my partner and I were in bed together, and I was laying in bed, I was fully paralyzed, I couldn't talk, and I was trying to communicate to them. And they looked down at me and gave me this evil sneer, as if they were possessed by a demon or something. And it was in that I started trying to scream even more in my dream, and I couldn't. And my partner in real life then woke me up and was like, hey, you were whimpering and crying, are you okay? And so since then, this year, I've been having more of these dreams where I'm paralyzed, I can't move, I can't talk, I'm trying to communicate, and I end up having to will myself awake out of them. And so the more recent ones, and now they're happening in increasing speed. They're happening like maybe once a month, then they were happening once a week. Last week they happened twice a week.
Wow.
And so the last week dreams was I was at a conference, and my colleague and I were originally supposed to share a room together, and we were presenting together. My colleague ended up not being able to come to the conference. Well, the night before our presentation,
Oh,
that I
dear.
had to change, I have this dream that we're both in our adjacent beds in the room that we were supposed to share, that my colleague is having a seizure and that I'm trying to help them, but I can't get out of the bed. I'm fully paralyzed. I can't move. I can't talk. Then they see that I'm struggling and they try to reach out to help me. And so
In the dream?
in the
Wow.
dream,
Wow.
in the dream, and both of us are trying to reach for each other with our arms across the,
Across the divide between the beds.
divider of the
Yeah.
beds, and we can't reach each other, and we're trying to reach each other. And then, I finally like kind of scream myself awake, and then my nervous system is always super wrecked. And
Yeah,
then the
yeah.
last one I'll briefly tell you about is that the most recent dream I had was actually a little bit different than all of them. And what happened was, I remember I was on Facebook and I'm looking at my friend's post who lives in Taos, New Mexico. And he has some post on a local forum that's like, someone's trying to break into so-and-so's house. And it's like a house where someone's been dead for a long time. It's abandoned. There's probably ghosts there. And when I hear that someone's trying to get into the house, I immediately have an understanding something bad's going to happen to that person, right? Like I immediately know, like, this is not going to end well. I don't want to read the rest of this post. Now, what ends up happening is then again, at the very end of the dream, I'm in bed. But this time I'm in that house. I'm in that haunted house. There are curtains next to the bed that I'm in. And I see a ghost like hide itself in those curtains. And this time I still have that same feeling of kind of like paralyzation happening in my body. But then I'm able to actually yell at the ghost, and I look directly into the curtains and I yell like as loud as I can, like, get out of here. I never wanted you to be here in the first place. Like I'm like yelling it that I don't want it there. And so those are to give you kind of a glimpse into what the
it's a
dreams
perfect.
are.
I love the 1, 2, 3 because they each have themes as I see them. But first, I just want to talk about this phenomena. You're having night terrors. It's got a fancy name. It's called a hypnagogic hallucination, and it's because you can't move because you're paralyzed. And you're dreaming because you're asleep, but there's a little bit of your consciousness that's waking up before it's supposed to. That's how you are aware of the inability to move, right? So it's a literal experience you're having, like 6/8 asleep, therefore fully in dreamland, but 2/8 awake enough to feel the paralysis when the dream kicks into the stressful point. So my first question before we dive into the content here is, what is your lifetime experience of these kinds of night terror experiences? Like, have you had this before?
I don't think I've ever had this in my life.
No
like if I've ever
way.
had it, it's been like once every 6 years. You know what I mean? Like
Got
it's
it. Okay.
not a common. If I've had it, it's been very rare.
Okay, first of all, it's a human experience. Many people, if not most, have it at some point. I've only had one. You've had one every handful of years, so it's in your body's chemistry to have this experience. So if we went to the scientific side, who would dismiss the mystical, we would just say, oh, well, you have the capacity to have this sort of, I would call it disordered sleeping, because it's not supposed to happen that way. You're supposed to lose the paralysis before you wake up at all. That's the organic way we're designed. And when it overlaps like this, the person has a terrifying dream that they cannot move because they can't. And they're awake enough to realize it. The idea that you haven't had this chronically is interesting. Now, this is really interesting that you just bam, bam, bam. So one thing I want to say about this is this tells me that the last 6 months you've been stressed. Like I know that you're stressed, and I just for the sake that we're doing this on video, and I just saw Rex's face go like, yes, they turned a little red, they got a little laughy because you right? Am I
Oh,
right?
you better believe the past
Like
6 months or so has been
12
the
out of
most
10.
stressful experience, some of the most stressful things
Yeah.
in my life that
Yeah.
have ever happened. Yeah.
Here's how I know that, because you simply have a chemical or structural capacity to have these experiences. It lives in your body that it does this. It's rare, but it happens regularly enough that I can say, oh, Rex has this capacity. Stress brings out anything that we have a capacity for that's in the mental health area.
Yeah.
Right? So what I love then about the content of these dreams is the first dream is about love and partnership. The second dream is about success at work. And the third dream is sort of about existence itself and life in bodies, where ghosts and the mystery world is also part of it. So to me, the three that you chose to share is like, I'm stressed about love, I'm stressed about work, I'm stressed about my existence in this mysterious place that I don't fully understand. And that's to me what the content is telling us. But the phenomena is because you're stressed and your body does this when stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. The three different, well, me and my partner have since broken up, right? And it was like a very tumultuous relationship. And so
Got it.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And my career, like it's blowing up in a way that it never has before, right? So I'm much more
is we
visible.
going to call that a positive expansion?
Oh, absolutely.
then
Hugely positive.
then let's go back to that dream, because to me, I love this. To me now, that dream means I, Rex, am overwhelmed that I'm going to have to do this on my own.
Yeah.
Right? You can't reach the colleague, and the colleague has a symbolism of assistance, help, collaboration. So you tell me that you're breaking out and that that's a positive expansion, but that it's overwhelming. Now the dream content reveals itself to me to be giving you that message. There's a desire to have help and support that's not really there if you're operating at a level that you haven't been at before.
Yeah.
Woohoo. And then that last dream, just the idea of hauntings and ghosts and, scary abandoned houses and being unable to help, like knowing that it's a disaster. To me, that's fear of death. On a fundamental human level, if I look at the top down of relationship, work, and fear of death is the triangle here.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on the expansion, and sorry about the bumpiness of love.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting because the last one too, one thing that I can say is that we had actually, like, our house was infested this year and we had to move out and get it cleaned and move back in and this whole thing. So I'm kind of like, I wonder how that plays into it. Yeah.
Well, sure. It's like the house is a scary and it's abandoned. Safety and our home are connected, right? So we feel safe in our homes if we do. And then if you are having a waking life, challenge to that home safety, you might have a dream that there's a dangerous place that, you call home.
Yeah.
So listen, what I sort of believe about the process of nightmares and dreams and recurring things like this is, as scary and uncomfortable as it is to feel paralyzed and have to scream yourself awake, I do believe that the dream experience is helping you meet life on its own terms, because you're going into your psyche at night and allowing it to express how much stress there is so that you can ultimately wake up the next day and meet it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. These were awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.